Alright, so today what we're going to be making is a watercolor portrait. So the first thing that you need to do is create your canvases. This is kind of what it's going to look like in the end. So we're going up to File, New, and we're going to make sure that our pixels are 19 by 20 and 1200 pixels. Make sure it says on the pixels. The resolution is 300 and your color mode is RGB. When you're done, go ahead and hit OK. And we need two of those. So go ahead and do the same thing. So File, New, 1920 by 1200 pixels, 300 resolution, RGB color. Hit OK again. So if you look at the tabs, we have Untitled number 1 and Untitled document number 2. So I need to go get my portrait. So I'm going to go find the portrait that I want to use, and I open it up in Photoshop. Okay, I'm going to have to copy and paste them onto the document, so Control A, Control C, and Control V. You can go ahead and click out of the gem.jpg image. He's a little bit small, so we have to resize him by hitting Control T, and make sure you hold Shift when you enlarge your image. So keep holding Shift. When you're done resizing, you can let go of Shift and just move them over. When you're done, you can hit Enter or the check mark. So we need to make some adjustments on this portrait to get rid of some of those grays. So I'm going to go up to Image, Adjustments, Brightness and Contrast. And I'm going to increase his brightness to get rid of some of those grays. So about 71 for brightness, and let's see, about 23 for contrast. And again, my goal is just to get rid of some of those gray values, and I can hit the preview to see that. So go ahead and hit OK. And now we need to duplicate this portrait here. So to duplicate a portrait, or any layer for that matter, all you have to do is you can either right click and go to Duplicate Layer, or you can go to Layer, Duplicate Layer. Totally up to you. So I'm going to right click and duplicate my layer, and I'm just going to call this watercolor layer and hit Enter. Okay. We're going to put a watercolor filter on this, so I'm going to go up to Filter, Artistic, and Watercolor. If you don't have that option, what you need to do is go to Edit, Preferences, Plugins, and make sure Show All Filter Gallery Groups and Names is checked, and then hit OK. So let's go back to Filter, Artistic, and Watercolor. And what you need to do is you need to pick out something that you like aesthetically, as far as how much texture you want, how intense your shadows are, your brush detail. So over here on the left or right hand side, you can toggle and figure out what kind of look you like. I'm going to put 12, 2, and 1. And then hit OK. So I have my watercolor layer, I have my portrait layer. So what we need to do now is we need to move the original portrait layer, this layer here, on top of all other layers. And what we're going to do here is we're going to go to Image, Adjustments, Threshold. And basically what this does, it makes it black and white. So you want to toggle it to where you can fully see the details of the eyes, nose, and mouth, or the important parts. So I'm going to do, let's see, about 150 to 153, and hit OK. I'm going to label this as Threshold Effect, so we know which layer is what. Alright, so on the Threshold Effect layer, I'm going to choose to click on that, so make sure it's highlighted in blue, and I'm going to change the blending mode to multiply, so that now I can see both layers. Now what I have to do is I have to merge both layers, so I'm going to hold Shift, click both layers so that both are highlighted, and I'm going to right click and merge my layers, so now that it becomes one whole layer. So we're pretty much done with our portrait part. Now we have to move on to putting paint on our other canvas. So here's our other canvas. I'm going to minimize this, X out of that, and I'm going to open up a few of the watercolor images that I really liked. So take some time to open up a couple, and you can always use just one for your composition, but it looks a little bit nicer if you have a variety. So how we do this is we need to copy and paste it onto that blank document. So Control A, Control C, Control V. It'll pop up, but it's going to be a little big. You might have to select the Move tool to move it around. And when you do it a second time, when you add that second paint splatter, you're going to see it moves right on top and you can't see it. So in order to be able to see both layers, I'm going to change my blending mode to multiply. So now I can see both. Now I don't want both my paint splatters to look exactly alike, so I can hit Control T and I can rotate it and I can resize it to make it look completely different. I can also grab a different paint splatter, Control A, Control C, Control V, change the blending mode to multiply, and use just a different paint splatter on top. What your goal is to get this pretty much fully covered wherever your portrait is. So take a couple minutes to copy and paste several different layers on here. And just remember, every single layer that you put down, you need to make sure that you change your blending mode to multiply so that you can see all of the layers underneath. So I'm going to rotate this one around here. And again, you can hold Shift to resize it if you want a smaller little splatter. But you want that almost entirely covered. So again, changing the blending mode to multiply. And I'm going to put the paint splatter there. And I'm almost done. You want about anywhere from 6 to 10 different layers, depending on how much your paint splatters are taking up. So that's pretty good for right now. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to merge all those layers into one layer. So how I do that is I hold Shift on my keyboard, select all of the layers, right click, merge layers, so that it's now one solid layer. And then I just copy it, so Control A, Control C, and I go to my portrait and hit Control V. Now you might have to move it over so they're right on top of each other. And pretty much now we're ready to basically put everything together. So to put everything together, what we're going to do is we're going to click the eyeball off the paint layer for a little bit so I can see the portrait. And I'm going to copy the portrait again by Control A, Control C, go back to the painted layer. Oops, see, I made a mistake here. I need to make sure I copy the portrait. So make sure you're on the portrait layer. So Control A, Control C, oops, Control A, Control C, go back to the painted layer, turn it on, and we're going to be making a layer mask. So how we do that, we need to make sure we're on the painted layer, go down here where it says Add Layer Mask, click on it, and in order to access that layer mask, I have to hold Alt, click the little white box, and a blank sheet of paper will appear. I'm going to paste my portrait by hitting Control V, and I'm going to move him over to the right. I see some ants kind of moving around my screen, so I'm going to deselect those by hitting Control D. And I need to invert my image so that my mask can work. So if I hit Control I to invert my image is now inverted. And I can hit this little paint layer here to see my final painted image. We don't need the threshold effect layer anymore, so go ahead and click off the eyeball. You can delete it if you want to, but to be on the safe side, I just take the eyeball off. Now we're going to be placing a background texture onto our document. So I'm going to minimize this and find my paper texture. So here's my paper texture. I'm going to open up in Photoshop. Okay. And I have to copy and paste it onto the document. So Control A, Control C, and Control V. I'm not going to be able to see anything here, so what I need to do is I need to change my blending mode so I can see all the other layers underneath. So instead of normal, I'm going to pick linear burn, and you notice that the colors would have changed. So I'm not really liking this little spot here, so I'm going to hit Control T to resize my image. I can rotate it because I like this side a little bit more. And I'm going to make this a little bit bigger just so I can move it down. And when you're done, you can just hit OK. So we're going to talk about some finishing touches right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some more paint splatters on top. So how we do that is I'm just going to go to the paint splatters that are already up. I'm going to hit Control A, Control C, and then Control V. Obviously we can't see anything right now, so I'm going to change it to linear burn so that it matches the current paint splatters. And I'm just going to move it over to the corner. Now you might have noticed there's some paint splatters on his face that I don't want, so I can hit the eraser tool and erase those paint splatters on that particular layer. Something else for your finishing touches that you can do is, say if you want some more paint splatters on his face, or if there's parts where it's faded, you can click on the painted layer, the one that has the chain, and select the clone tool. And how the clone tool works is if you hold Alt on your keyboard and select a section, I would select a darker section, and you let go of Alt. If you click on something, you notice that there are two little things that pop up. The circle where you're painting and the little cross where it's taking it from. So if you want to fill this a little bit more, you can always sample different spots and add to your creation to just kind of fill it in just a little bit more and make it a little more full. So I'm going to finish adding a little bit more to my portrait. Okay, and we're done.